Hello and welcome to 365 Days of Healing. Today we're going to draw a card from a pack of wisdom cards. Now, in these cards there is a message for us each day, and we will just draw one of them. We'll shuffle them randomly and have a look at what the message is for us in these wisdom cards. Now, the wisdom comes from the deepest part of ourselves. It comes from our learning, maybe by mistakes we've made, and so we change our behaviours, and we call that change, and then living with those changes wise, because we are actually serving our highest self, our highest good, and what we perceive as our highest good, unless, of course, we choose something very negative, and of course we can do that as well. One of the advantages of being human is that we do have freedom of choice to a point. So when we are wise beings, and when we perceive that we are doing things for our highest self, we are growing in consciousness, we are yearning to reach the highest potential that we have with that consciousness, that understanding within us, we become more and more wise, and we make choices that service that part of ourself. So that's what we are about healing. The more we do that, the more we make choices that serve our highest self, or the greatest potential that we are, that work towards the highest level of consciousness, the more peaceful we feel, the more joyful we feel, the more in harmony with nature we feel, and the benefits for us are one of feeling uplifted, and one of feeling at one with our world, and then the transformation that starts to happen towards higher and higher dimensions of understanding. Now, we are in this form, this bodily form, in this 3D plane. But there is a certain density in the 3D earth. So if we want to move out of that, if we start to grow in consciousness, if we start to rise towards our greatest potential with our consciousness, we are moving into other dimensions of understanding, until we get to a point where this density here actually starts to transform, and we start to move out of this 3D realm, and we move towards 4D, 5D, and so on, up the scale towards just the purity of consciousness. We move towards just life force energy in its infinite state. And that part of us is within us anyway. There is an infinity within our soul, within the spirit that we have that guides us through this world. So if we start tapping into that, and if we use some of the healing rituals, we find it easier and easier to work towards the highest states of consciousness. All right, so these are wisdom cards. We'll just shuffle the cards, and we'll choose a card, or we might even choose two cards and speak to what these cards may have to show us. So here we go. The first, the card that I had drawn, it is saying to be proactive. Now that means that we must make choices, positive choices, towards working with what it means to become more and more conscious, so that we disempower the parts of us that are holding us in this dense form of 3D. If we go into a mode of observation rather than just moving through each moment as it presents itself, if we begin to observe our behaviours, if we begin to observe our thinking, if we begin to observe our place in this on this earth where we are, we then begin to have the capacity to elicit changes if we choose to. So being proactive means that we must sit quietly and observe the spaces between what we are doing. Even the spaces between our breath gives us signs to what other dimensions are about. So within the space between anything is where we begin to observe what it means to step outside of the density of where we are in this world, in this moment of doing and gathering and just relationships that may be bogging us down. So if we take the time to observe some of the patterns of behaviour that we have, we then have the capacity to begin the change that we need or that we want to give us more of a sense of freedom outside of the day-to-day grind. So observation comes first. We humans have the capacity to observe ourselves, to observe the way we think, to observe the way we feel, to observe the relationships that we're in, to observe our part in nature, to observe our part in the universe. Once we begin that observation, we begin to believe and understand that we are not just the centre of the universe. We actually are a part of the whole. So everything that we're observing in our orbit is all a part of who we are, and it is a part of making up the whole of the universal understanding. So number one is observation, and observation assists us to make choices. So by observation, it takes us down a proactive road of then being able to make a choice of what we are going to decide to do. So the choices that present themselves once we have begun observing everything around us allows us to find what feeds into our higher understanding, our higher levels of consciousness. And so we make choices of which pathway we may choose to follow. Now, once that begins to happen, and once we are proactive in that, we then start to live in a different way. We are not just acting and reacting. We are actually making choices about what we are going to think, what we are going to feel, what our hopes and aspirations are, and what our place in the world is about. When we begin to do that, we then start to realise that everything around us is actually quite illusionary. It is not just the way we perceive it to be in a 3D form. It actually is something that we can observe all around us, and therefore we become omnipresent here in this form. We start to recognize that everything around us is actually just an illusion, and it doesn't have the capacity to invade us or to be as real as we perceive it to be if we lived in a 3D world. Then we have the capacity to grow in consciousness and keep growing in consciousness and moving more and more towards what this part of us, this yearning part of us, wants to be a part of. And that is to have unity with the essence. So it's not just about unity with the essence. We then become the essence. We are the essence. And therein lies probably the highest level of consciousness that there is, that we aspire to. We become the essence. We become exactly the uplifting, wisest part of ourself. And then we begin to incorporate the whole into that whole regime of what it means before we actually began to take form. Now, there's some very esoteric and metaphysical concepts for us to ponder. And unless we are proactive in the pursuit of understanding what that essence is about, then our life is just in the mundane, in the 3D form, in the everyday here and now, and it becomes the grind. Once we start to open that part of ourselves that see beyond what is just what our senses here perceive, and we start to tap into this third eye, we open our consciousness, we open this crown chakra, we open all these understandings to higher and higher forms of not just what we perceive, but in our imagination. And we can go on all sorts of journeys, not just visualizing those journeys, but they become our journey. And we actually become more and more enlightened. And the more enlightened we become, the more we become part of the presence that is the I am presence. So, the wisdom cards have given us a whole range of thinking for today, and I send many blessings your way to open up that third eye and that crown chakra, to bring in your imagination, to bring in the understanding of the divine, that you are the divine, you are part of the divine, you are not just part of the divine, you are the divine, you are the essence of all that is. The seed of that is deep within you, and it is deep within your yearning. So I leave you with those thoughts. Namaste.